In this particular class, we are going to study about nervous system. In nervous system, we are going to study about brainstem. Brainstem connects the forebrain and spinal cord. And the three parts are the midbrain, the pons and medulla oblongata. रिपीट करती हूँ, ब्रेन स्टेम हम फोर ब्रेन और स्पाइनल कॉर्ड को कनेक्ट करता है. थ्री पार्ट्स है, मिड ब्रेन, पॉन्स और मेडुला ऑब्लोंगेटा. Mid brain is the first thing that we are going to study. Students, this part of midbrain that you're able to see here in this picture is also called mesencephalon. This is the shortest segment of the brainstem. When you compare it to pons and medulla, this is a very short segment that is there. And its cavity, the cerebral aqueduct, connects to the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. Now, we'll understand further about this in the next slide when you will be seeing the image of midbrain. So as I mentioned, midbrain, also called mesencephalon, shortest segment of brainstem, and connects pons and cerebellum with forebrain. And its cavity, that is cerebral aqueduct, connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. So here, to make it more clear, you can see cerebral aqueduct has been marked, and you can see how the cerebral aqueduct is connected to the fourth ventricle and here the third ventricle. Now, to understand further about the midbrain, let us see the midbrain in various views. If we see this ventral aspect of the midbrain, to review again, this is the short segment we are talking about, students. Midbrain. Okay, this is the part we are talking about. Now, the midbrain contains nuclei of origin of cranial nerves, that is nerve 3, that is you can see here the oculomotor nerve, and 4, that is trochlear nerve. Apart from the cranial nerve nuclei, the midbrain is also having the areas that control, coordinate the movement of eyeball in response to a visual stimuli. To see those areas, I will take you all to the next diagrams, which will show you the dorsal aspect of the brainstem. तो हमने अभी ventral aspect देखा है. Now let us see the dorsal aspect. Here you can see the superior colliculus, and here you can see the inferior colliculus. So I was talking about these two places, right? These are the locations that are responsible for the visual and also auditory stimuli. Okay, now to understand further, let us see the various parts also. Now, the midbrain is traversed by cerebral aqueduct. Here you can see the cerebral aqueduct, students. तो ये हम क्या देख रहे हैं, हम ट्रांसवर्स सेक्शन देख रहे हैं. We are seeing the transverse section of midbrain. So here you can see the cerebral aqueduct, and you can see we are having this imaginary line that is dividing the cerebral, this particular part of midbrain into tectum and cerebral peduncle. Fine. So here again in the midbrain, now we are seeing the transverse section. This cerebral aqueduct is the landmark here. An imaginary line drawn through this transverse section of midbrain. यहाँ आपको tectum दिख रहा है, and this is the cerebral peduncle. And now besides this, we need to also understand that the part lying in front of the transverse line is made up of right and the left cerebral peduncles. Each consists of three parts. You can see the parts also here. The first is the crus cerebri, the second is substantia nigra, and the third is tegmentum. Okay, now talking about the cerebral aqueduct, it is surrounded by gray matter which contains the nuclei of trochlear nerve and oculomotor nerve. Okay, now the tectum part of midbrain, this part is made up of pair of superior colliculi. That is why I have shown you this particular view also, lateral view also. So when we talk about tectum, so you can think of कि जो एक्वेडक्ट के यहाँ से अगर ऐसा एक इमेजिनरी लाइन ड्रॉ कर रहे हैं, ये आगे का पार्ट जो है ये पूरा जो है आपका सेरेब्रल पेडंकल के साइड को है, और ये पार्ट जो है यहाँ पे टेक्टम का पार्ट है. ठीक है, तो व्हाट यू आर व्यूइंग हियर, वी आर व्यूइंग द लैटरल व्यू, एंड हियर यू कैन सी द सुपीरियर colliculi and the inferior colliculi. The superior colliculus is connected to the lateral geniculate body by a brachium and is concerned with the visual pathway. Fine. The inferior colliculus is connected to the medial geniculate body and is concerned with the auditory pathway. Now, we need to know what is the role of all these things. The crus cerebri we are talking about. The crus cerebri is made up of descending fibers. The most important among this is the pyramidal tract. Students, these parts are important now, because now when in third year you will be learning psychiatry, you will learn brain disorders, there will be mention of pyramidal tract. So you need to understand this is the area we are talking about, is made up of descending fibers, and the most important among this is the pyramidal tract that we are talking about. Next you can see this is the substantia nigra that we had talked about. This is a thin layer, you can see this, it's deeply staining gray matter, and the neurons contain a pigment called neuromelanin. This has important connections with striatum. If you remember, in our last classes we have studied striatum. It's made up of caudate nucleus and putamen. This is the place where dopamine is produced by neurons and it passes along their axons into the striatum. Now, the clinical application of this at your first year level, what you need to understand is, if dopamine production decreases, student, here, if the dopamine production decreases, what would happen? The person would suffer from a disease called Parkinsonism. We had discussed about this when we were dealing with basal nuclei. And Parkinsonism symptoms are very obvious. Tremors are seen. Sometimes rigidity is seen in the person. Face may not show expressions. There may be salivation. So all this, when you see, you should be alert that it could be a problem here. That means dopamine production. Right? Then when we talk about tegmentum, this part, tegmentum contains ascending sensory fibers, mainly spinothalamic tract. So we have now, in this particular slides that we have seen, almost 8 slides we have seen, we have understood about the midbrain. Fine. And besides that, we have understood that when we see it through transverse section, you can see more parts. And after understanding all this, we need to understand the clinical correlation, students. Now, see, if there is a blockage in the cerebral aqueduct is actually helping in the movement of the cerebrospinal fluid, right? तो यहाँ अगर blockage है, So the draining of the fluid would not happen, and the child would suffer from hydrocephalus. So when you learn in third year pediatric conditions, you will hear a condition called hydrocephalus. That is mainly, the reason is blockage of this particular duct. Okay. Another thing in clinical correlation we need to understand is Weber's syndrome. If there is a thrombosis, what is thrombosis? If there is some clot formation in the artery, or if there is hemorrhage because of rupture of vessels, both the reasons are going to affect the blood supply to the midbrain, right? So if there is a thrombosis or if there is a hemorrhage, then to the vessels that are supplying to the midbrain, it can lead to oculomotor paralysis. And at the same side, and hemiplegia can happen to the opposite side. So these are the major things we have understood about midbrain. Now let us go further. Let us understand further. We have again taken this view of ventral aspect of brain stem, and we have already discussed about the midbrain. Now the next part that we are going to discuss is pons. Pons, the other meaning of it is bridge. Pons lies between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. On each side, it is connected to the cerebellum. So when you see here, on one side you have midbrain, and the other side you have medulla oblongata, right? And on each side, what you can see? You can see the middle cerebral peduncle this side, and you can see here also. Pons is what? It is made up of gray and white matter, and it is important physiologically. In our units of respiration, we had studied about pons, and I had mentioned to you all that we will see in detail about it when we'll be dealing with the nervous system also. So pons is the place where actually it is called the center of respiration, right? And the other things that you can see here, you can see this particular nerve, students. This is trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal nerve के बाद में ये है abducent. This is facial nerve. This is vestibulocochlear nerve. तो ये सारे जो nerves हैं, ये pons के यहाँ से originate होते हैं. Okay, so till here it is clear to you all. Now we need to also understand that pons show a convex anterior surface marked by prominent transversely running fibers. The striations you are seeing is actually to indicate that the fibers are running from this side to this side, but see, here it forms a bundle. And this is the middle cerebral peduncle this side, and also forming a cerebral peduncle this side. The trigeminal nerve emerges from the anterior surface, and the point of this emergence here, this is taken as a landmark to define the plane of junction between pons and the middle cerebral peduncle. So when I look at this on pons, when this part is located, trigeminal nerve is seen projecting out, we say this is the area, the field, the plane of junction between pons and the middle cerebral peduncle. The line of junction between the pons and the medulla, this is marked by a groove through which you will see a number of cranial nerves that are going. Okay? These are the cranial nerves that are emerging from these grooves. The line of junction between the pons and the medulla is marked by a groove through which a number of cranial nerves emerge. The posterior aspect of the pons forms the upper part of the floor of the fourth ventricle. So, Now, once we have understood about pons, let me quickly again mention pons. The word means bridge. It is between midbrain and medulla. Then we saw ये थोड़ा जो ये structure जो है ये convex सा structure बनाता है, right? As I see, you can see the marker going on, and these are fibers that are running transversely. यहाँ पे मिडल सेरेब्रल पेडंकल है, यहाँ पर भी मिडल सेरेब्रल पेडंकल है. ट्राइजेमिनल नर्व यहाँ पर दिख रहा है आपको इमर्जिंग आउट, एंड हियर यू कैन सी एब्ड्यूसन, फेशियल एंड द वेस्टिबुलोकॉकुलर nerve emerging out. And this is the landmark for you to understand कि pons middle cerebral peduncle के साथ ज्वाइन हो रहा है. एंड पॉन्स और मेडुला का जो जंक्शन है, यहाँ पे आप ये ग्रूव्स देख रहे हैं, यहाँ से आप देख रहे हैं कितने सारे ग्लॉसोफेरेंजियल, हाइपोग्लॉसल नर्व, वेगस नर्व, accessory nerves, all the nerves are emerging from this place. Okay, now after understanding this, the significance of pons, let us see the clinical correlation. If there is any lesion of pons, what can happen? One is Fowell syndrome, that is contralateral hemiplegia and ipsilateral paralysis of 6th and the 7th cranial nerve can occur. Okay, 6th and the 7th cranial nerve, that means we can say abducent and facial nerves due to lesion involving the corticospinal tract and the nuclei of the 6th and the 7th cranial nerves. So please understand, when we say contralateral, what it means? The opposite side, and ipsilateral would mean the same side. Okay, so Fowell syndrome is one thing that you can expect if there is any lesion in the pons. You will see opposite side hemiplegia and same side paralysis. All these things you can see. खासकर किस चीज का? 6th and the 7th cranial nerves you can see the effect on. Next is Millard-Gubler syndrome. This results due to lesion involving the corticospinal tract and facial nerve fibers. Okay, so next thing that you will learn in further years when you will be learning neurological disorders, Millard-Gubler syndrome results due to lesion involving corticospinal tract and facial nerve fibers. अब corticospinal tract, just try to recollect, हमने कहाँ पे इसके बारे में बात किया था? क्रस सेरेब्राई के यहाँ पर, है ना? सो वहाँ अगर कुछ इश्यू है उसके साथ में कनेक्ट करो. यहाँ पर भी जो आपके ये फेशियल नर्व्स निकल रहे हैं, दोनों में इफेक्ट हो रहा है, एंड देयर कैन बी अ डिफिकल्टी हियर. ठीक है, सो दैट इज अ Millard-Gubler syndrome. And the next thing is pontine hemorrhage. This results in pinpoint pupils, hyperpyrexia and bilateral paralysis of face and limbs. So अगर pontine hemorrhage हुआ है, right, इधर पे कोई hemorrhage है, it will result in pinpoint pupils. Pupils you have studied, students, you have studied in physical examination. We are seeing the reaction of pupil towards the torch, the pen torchlight, right? So how the pupils react? We always check whether it is pupils are equal and reacting to light and accommodation. हम पूरा चेक करते हैं ना, तो वहां पर आप देखोगे कि pupils react नहीं कर रहे हैं, वो पिन पॉइंट है बिल्कुल. वो एक चीज आप देखोगे. और ये ज्यादातर आप कहाँ देखोगे पता है? जो पेशेंट्स हेड इंजरी होके जो एडमिट पड़े रहते हैं पेशेंट्स, वहाँ पे उनकी पोंटाइन हेमरेज का वेरी क्लियर जो सिम्टम आपको दिखेगा वो है पिन पॉइंट पिपल्स. सेकेंड थिंग, हाइपरपायरेक्सिया and bilateral paralysis of face and limbs. So this is about your pons. Next, let us see medulla oblongata. Let us understand further. Okay, this slide also we'll quickly review. Pneumotaxic center, apnestic center, expiratory center, inspiratory center. So this is the justification why we say that actually pons is your center of Now students, we have come to this particular slide. We are using the ventral aspect of brainstem to visualize the medulla of the whole brainstem, right? In this, what we understand is medulla is the part of the brainstem. This is about 3 centimeter in length. It is continuous above with the pons and below is the spinal cord. So students, you have seen every time when we describe a part, for example, when I said pons, I was saying above is midbrain and below is medulla. Same way you have to understand whenever we describe something, always mention what is above, what is below, what is in relation to it, right? So medulla के ऊपर यहाँ पे pons है और medulla आगे जाके spinal cord के साथ में जुड़ जाता है. Now in further slides you will see that we will discuss about the ventral aspect, or which is also called the anterior aspect, and also we will discuss about the posterior aspect, which is also called the dorsal aspect. So now in this particular slide we will understand the external features, ventral surface of medulla. In the external features or ventral aspect, the first part is the pyramid. You can see here the pyramid. It is the region between the anterior median sulcus, right? Here is the anterior median sulcus and the anterolateral sulcus. Anterior median sulcus and the anterolateral sulcus, and is occupied either side of the midline by an elevation that is called the pyramid. The elevation is caused by a large bundle of fibers. यहाँ पर आप ये जो elevation देख रहे हो, the main elevation that you are seeing here is because of a large bundle of fibers that descend from the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord. Okay, so that has to be understood. Next is olive. You are seeing here olive. In the upper part of the medulla, the region between the anterolateral and posterolateral sulcus. You can see here is the anterolateral sulcus और posterolateral sulcus इसके पीछे है. We will not be able to see this, but वो जो space है दोनों के बीच का, that is occupied by a elongated oval swelling which is named as olive. This swelling is about half an inch long and is produced by a large mass of gray matter called inferior olivary nucleus. Okay? So I repeat again, we have seen pyramid here. Pyramid is a large bundle of fibers that descend from cerebral cortex to the spinal cord, and here we are seeing the olive. Here you can see the olive. Besides this, we have to also see roots of hypoglossal nerve. These emerge from the anterolateral sulcus. Here they would emerge from there. Then between the pyramid and the olive. Inferior cerebral peduncles are there. Inferior cerebral peduncles of the left and the right side attach the medulla with the cerebellum. Rootlets of 9, 10 and 12. यहाँ भी आपको दिख रहा है ये जो छोटे छोटे rootlets हैं 9, 10 और 12. यहाँ पर the cranial nerves, these emerge through the posterolateral sulcus. है ना, इसके पैरेलल में आप इस साइड में देखो posterolateral sulcus के वहां से emerge होते हैं, separating the olive from the inferior cerebral peduncle. Now, besides this, we need to see also the next aspect of it. Let's see the dorsal surface of medulla. What are the things that we can locate here? The posterior surface of the lower part, the closed part of medulla, between the posterior median sulcus and the posterolateral sulcus contains tracts that enter from the posterior funiculus of the spinal cord. These are the fasciculus gracilis. So here now you can see the marking here, fasciculus gracilis. What is it? The posterior surface of the lower part, lower part of the medulla between the posterior median sulcus, यहाँ पे आपके posterior median sulcus contain tracts that enter from the posterior funiculus. तो यहाँ पर जो ये दिख रहा है tracts, these are labeled as fasciculus gracilis next to the midline and fasciculus cuneatus placed laterally. तो एकदम midline की तरफ gracilis है और laterally जो है वो fasciculus cuneatus है. Placed laterally, these fasciculus end in rounded elevations. Okay, so these actually come further and they form gracile tubercle. यहाँ से तो शुरू हुआ, right? यहाँ पर भी आप देख रहे हो, it is starting from here and further coming here they form the gracile and cuneate tubercles. These tubercles are produced by masses of gray matter called the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. The lower part of the medulla, immediately lateral to the fasciculus cuneatus, is marked by another longitudinal elevation that is called the tuberculum cinereum. Okay, that is the next marking that we are seeing. Tuberculum cinereum, you can see here that has been marked. This elevation is produced by an underlying collection of gray matter of the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerves. So this is immediately lateral to the fasciculus cuneatus here and here also immediately lateral to it. You can see here is the tuberculum cinereum. This elevation is produced by what? It is produced by underlying collection of gray matter of spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. The posterior surface of the upper medulla forms the lower part of the floor of the fourth ventricle. So these are the things we have understood. Now, after understanding the dorsal surface of the medulla, what we have to understand, students, the vital centers of the body. What are the vital centers of the body? The medulla is the seat for many vital centers of the body. Vital centers located in medulla, let us see what are the vital centers. The respiratory center, okay, that means the rate at which we breathe, the rhythm in which we breathe, the force of the respiration, all is controlled here. These centers are bilaterally situated in reticular formation of the brainstem. And depending upon the situation in the brainstem, the respiratory centers are classified into two. एक है medullary center which are made up of dorsal respiratory group of neurons and ventral respiratory group of neurons. You will be now able to actually correlate, right? When we have studied respiratory system में हमने इन सब के बारे में डिस्कस किया था और अच्छे से आपको अब समझ में आया होगा. Pontine centers हैं, pontine centers में pneumotaxic center है और apnestic center है. Okay, so this is the main thing that you have to understand. आपने जो आज मेडुला के बारे में पढ़ा है, ये मेडुला जो है ये वाइटल सेंटर है. क्यों? क्योंकि यहाँ पर रेस्पिरेटरी सेंटर भी होता है और कार्डियोवैस्कुलर सेंटर भी होता है. रेस्पिरेटरी सेंटर में आपके मेडुलरी सेंटर्स हैं जिसमें हमने देखा डॉर्सल रेस्पिरेटरी ग्रुप ऑफ न्यूरॉन्स हैं और वेंट्रल रेस्पिरेटरी ग्रुप ऑफ न्यूरॉन्स आर देयर and we have seen pontine centers with pneumotaxic center and apnestic center. Cardiovascular center, the area located in the heart controls the rate and force of uterine contraction and blood pressure. Okay, so these also you have to see. Here we have finished this particular topic on brainstem. We have seen the three major parts. We have seen midbrain, pons and medulla. हमने इसके anatomical parts को भी समझा है and clinical correlation also we have understood in this particular class.